This is the fourth episode of the Bob Lazar story, and I want to be honest with you about something. I have been doing intelligence analysis and source evaluation for a long time, and I can tell you that the Bob Lazar case is by any measure one of the most analytically resistant cases I have ever worked. Not because the evidence is sparse, because the evidence is deliberately shaped by Lazar himself, by his supporters, by his detractors, and possibly by institutions with the capability and the motive to shape it. Almost every piece of evidence in this case has been handled by people with a conclusion already in mind. That means the signal is buried under enormous quantities of noise. Today we score the matrix. We weight the evidence, and we deliver the most honest answer we can, which I'm warning you now is not the answer you're hoping for. Let me take you through every significant evidence item we've examined and score it against each of our three hypotheses. I'll use a simple system. Individual weights of C for consistent, I for inconsistent, and ND for not diagnostic. If hypotheses score the same, the item doesn't discriminate between them and carries no analytical weight. The only items that matter are the ones where the hypotheses score differently from each other. That's where the discrimination happens and where the analytical load sits. Item 1, the Los Alamos phone directory entry. Whistleblower, consistent. Of course he'd be in the directory if he was a real physicist there. Fabricator, consistent. A real but peripheral role at Los Alamos is fully compatible with constructing a false story around it. Disinformation, consistent. A real institutional footprint is required for a credible plant. Bottom line, consistent with all three. It doesn't help us to discriminate, so we move on. Item 2, the W-2 tax form from the United States Department of Naval Intelligence. Whistleblower, inconsistent. Real classified programs use real employer names as cover. A made-up agency name would be sloppy for a genuine black program, unless the error was deliberate, which would suggest the operation had disinformation elements baked in from the start. Fabricator, consistent. Someone who didn't know the real agency is called the Office of Naval Intelligence might invent a name that sounds official but isn't. That's exactly what this document has. Disinformation, consistent, possibly by design. A professional operation might deliberately use a non-existent agency as a firewall. No FOIA request can touch an agency that doesn't exist. No congressional oversight applies to it. The wrong name isn't necessarily a mistake, it may be the point. Bottom line, since the document is real enough to be credible and wrong enough to be deniable, and that description fits a fabricator and a disinformation operation equally well, it shouldn't be cited as evidence for either. We can't discriminate between fabricator or disinformation. Item 3, the missing credentials at MIT and Caltech. Looking at the credentials evidence, Stanton Friedman found no record of Lazar attending a single class at MIT. Not a missing degree, no attendance at all. The two graduate professors Lazar named turned out to be his high school vocational teacher and his community college instructor. His undergraduate degree came from a diploma mill. His degree sequence contradicts itself between his court record and his 1993 account. His claimed MIT date conflicts with his Los Alamos badge date. His claimed Caltech date conflicts with his Las Vegas residency records. In 35 years, not one classmate or professor from either school has come forward. Those aren't missing records, they're verifiable lies. We score this as inconsistent with whistleblower, consistent with fabricator, and consistent with disinformation. Item 4, the May 1989 broadcast date. Whistleblower, not diagnostic. The physics being public before the broadcast means we can't use it as evidence of inside access. A genuine whistleblower would know the physics from working with the technology, but so would someone who read Scientific American that month. Fabricator, not diagnostic. The May 1989 Scientific American issue, on newsstands by late April, weeks before the May 15 broadcasts, named element 115 as a predicted stability candidate. A technically literate person could have read it and built from it. Disinformation, not diagnostic. Consistent, but for the same reason as fabricator hypothesis, the material was available to anyone. Bottom line, not diagnostic across all three. We move on. Item 5. No corroborating witness to S4. In 35 years, not one person who claims to have been inside S4 has come forward to support Lazar's account. This matters because Area 51 has produced named, documented witnesses to conventional classified programs. Men like T.D. Barnes and James Knowles, who worked on Project Oxcart and spoke publicly about it. Major programs produce multiple sources over time. Whistleblower, inconsistent. If 9 craft were housed at S4 and an entire team of scientists worked on them, the probability that Lazar is the only person who has ever spoken about it is very low. Real programs with real personnel leak. 35 years of total silence is close to fatal. Fabricator, consistent. If S4 doesn't exist as described, there's no one to corroborate it. Disinformation, consistent. If S4 was staged specifically for Lazar, a controlled environment built to give him exactly the experience the operation needed him to have, then there are no other scientists, no other witnesses, no other personnel with knowledge of alien craft. He's the only one who saw what he was meant to see. The corroboration gap isn't a problem, it's the predicted outcome. Bottom line, we can't discriminate between fabricator and disinformation. Item 6, the selective disclosure pattern. On a December 1989 radio broadcast, Lazar described flying saucers and gave out performance specifications for the classified Aurora aircraft. Then a caller asked about Russian MiGs at Groom Lake. Lazar said he couldn't discuss it. Same show, same host. That threshold makes no sense for a whistleblower. If you're already describing alien craft on public radio, Russian aircraft at the same base is a minor detail. You don't get to pick and choose if you're acting from conscience. You do get to pick and choose if someone told you what you can and can't say. Whistleblower, inconsistent. The selective disclosure doesn't fit someone acting from conscience. Fabricator, inconsistent. A fabricator avoids topics he doesn't know enough about, but the threshold here is too precise. He'll discuss alien craft freely, but draws a hard line at Russian MiGs specifically. Disinformation, consistent. Authorized disclosure under controlled parameters would produce exactly this pattern. Bottom line, weighted towards the disinformation hypothesis. Item 7, the Los Alamos Monitor newspaper article, 1982. Whistleblower, consistent. He was there, the newspaper confirms it. Fabricator, consistent. You don't need to be a staff physicist to claim you were one. You just need to have been there in subcapacity. The newspaper establishes that. Disinformation, consistent. A managed source needs a real institutional footprint. The newspaper provides one. Bottom line, the reason this item carries no discriminating weight is straightforward. All three hypotheses predict the same outcome. Lazar was at Los Alamos in some capacity. That is now documented fact. What that presence means is where the hypotheses diverge, and the newspaper article alone can't tell us which interpretation is correct. Item 8, the John Lear document overlap. Lear's December 1987 statement, published on a public computer network 17 months before Lazar's first broadcast, contained every non-physics element of Lazar's account. Groom Lake as the secret facility, recovered craft being test flown there, MJ-12 as the controlling authority, and Edward Teller as an MJ-12 member. Lear is also the man who introduced Lazar to George Knapp. Whistleblower, inconsistent. Every non-physics element of Lazar's story was already in a public document published 17 months earlier, written by the man who introduced him to George Knapp. That's a contamination pathway, not a coincidence. Fabricator, consistent. Lear wrote the blueprint. Then Lear handed Lazar to Knapp. A fabricator couldn't have asked for a better starting point. Disinformation, consistent. Operational groundwork looks exactly like this. You see the narrative before your source goes public. Lear's document did that, intentionally or not. Bottom line, inconsistent with whistleblower, consistent with both fabricator and disinformation. Item 9. The Richard Doty Zeta Reticuli overlap. In October 1988, 7 months before Lazar's May 1989 broadcast, Richard Doty appeared on the national television broadcast UFO Cover-Up Live and named Zeta Reticuli as the origin point of recovered extraterrestrial craft. Doty is a documented Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent with a confirmed history of running disinformation operations against civilian UFO researchers. 7 months later, Lazar named the same star system, attributing it to briefing documents he read at S4. Whistleblower, inconsistent. A confirmed government disinformation agent named Zeta Reticuli on national television 7 months before Lazar named it. That sequence is hard to explain as coincidence. Fabricator, consistent. Zeta Reticuli was already the standard alien origin story in UFO culture, traceable to the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1974. A fabricator building a story in 1989 would reach for what was already established. Disinformation, consistent. Doty is not a civilian. He is a documented government disinformation operative. The same origin story appears in his broadcast and then in Lazar's account 7 months later. This is the only item in the matrix that carries an institutional fingerprint. Bottom line, inconsistent with whistleblower, consistent with fabricator, consistent with disinformation, with the added weight that one of the prior sources is a confirmed government operative. No other matrix item carries that. Item 10. The Alcubierre propulsion parallel. In May 1989, Lazar described a propulsion system that works by warping space-time around the craft, rather than pushing it through space, moving the destination to the craft, rather than the craft to the destination. In 1994, physicist Miguel Alcubierre independently published a paper describing exactly that mechanism. His paper was considered genuinely novel. The concept was not in the literature in 1989. Whistleblower, consistent. A genuine insider with access to working technology would be in a position to describe how it works, regardless of whether the physics had been published yet. Fabricator, not diagnostic. He could have made it up, but someone with no verifiable physics education described something professional physicists hadn't thought of yet. That's worth sitting with. Disinformation, not diagnostic. A disinformation operation could have given him the propulsion concept, or he could have invented it himself. The evidence doesn't tell us which. Bottom line, consistent with whistleblower, not diagnostic for fabricator, and disinformation. This is the one item where whistleblower has an edge, not because the other hypotheses are ruled out, but because someone who actually worked with the technology is the simplest explanation for a detail that nobody else had published yet. What the evidence is telling us. Whistleblower is the hypothesis the evidence most contradicts, and it isn't close. 6 inconsistent scores against 3 consistent. No corroborating witnesses in 35 years. A story that mirrors a public document published 17 months before he told it. An origin story he attributes to classified briefing documents that a confirmed government disinformation agent had already put on national television 7 months earlier. Any one of those is a problem. Together, they are fatal. Fabricator scores 7 consistent and 1 inconsistent. Its strength is breadth. The narrative elements were available. The contamination pathway through Lear is explicit. and the credential record fits the pattern of someone who built modest real credentials and claimed prestigious ones on top. Its one weak spot is the selective disclosure pattern. Ignorance doesn't produce that kind of precise, topic-specific threshold. Disinformation scores 8 consistent and 0 inconsistent. It is the only hypothesis the evidence does not contradict on a single item. It absorbs the corroboration gap as a predicted outcome. It is the only hypothesis that explains the selective disclosure pattern. The matrix has a clear leader. Disinformation is least contradicted. Not because it's proven, because the evidence leaves it standing when everything else has taken damage. We said at the start of the series that we would follow the evidence and sit with uncertainty rather than reach for a comfortable answer. That's not a failure of the analysis. That's what honest analysis looks like when the evidence runs out. In closing, here's what I think as someone who has spent 30 years evaluating sources and claims where the data ambiguity is high. Bob Lazar encountered something. I'm confident of that. What it was, I'm not. And I think that ambiguity is deliberate. Whistleblower has 6 inconsistent scores. That's not close. The interesting question was never whether Lazar was telling the whole truth. It was whether he made it up, or whether someone made it up for him. Fabricator has 1 inconsistent score. Disinformation has none. A fabricator and a disinformation asset look almost identical from the outside. That may not be an accident. 8 months after Lazar's first broadcast, a Nevada corporation was filed under the name Zeta Reticuli II Incorporated. Majority shareholder and president, Robert Bigelow. That is a primary source document. And Bigelow is the thread that connects Lazar, Skinwalker Ranch, and everything that comes after. Arc 2 pulls that thread. This has been Arc 1 of the Circle Jerk. Stay analytical. We'll see you in Arc 2.